Good morning, everyone. My name is Sam Ostrowski, and I'm the Associate Director of the Master of Science in Sustainability Management. I want to welcome you today to our Sustainability Space discussion. The Sustainability Space is a series of virtual discussion-based events for students in the sustainability programs at the Earth Institute at Columbia University. These event series, it's hosted by faculty and student group leaders, and the presentations and discussions explore a variety of critical topics. Today, the event is hosted by one of our fabulous instructors, Bhakti Mirchandani, and I will hand it to her. Bhakti.
Thanks, Sam. It's great to be here with all of you today. I know some of you from class, either currently or previously, and part of the reason Columbia wanted to put these events together is because it's been a harder job market. It's been harder to network. No one wants to shake hands and grab a coffee when everyone's worried about COVID. So we really wanted to bring some experts in the field to you to help you kind of think through, have informational interviews, and kind of think about this as an informational interview about kind of the asset owner space. Being an asset owner is a pretty special perspective in the investment value chain. And one of the things that we want to highlight in our conversation today is just the asset owner, asset manager dialogue. From our perspective at Trinity Church, the asset owner, asset manager dialogue really is the fulcrum of the investment value chain. We believe that partnering with asset managers that we allocate to really helps us drive systemic change. And we wanted to bring that perspective to life. The asset owners on this panel span asset classes: real estate, private equity, hedge funds, and also there are different types of asset owners. We have faith-based institutions. We have a public pension from the Netherlands. We're very lucky here to have with us today experts in the field. Keren is a senior responsible investing specialist at APG Asset Management, where she is the global responsible investing lead for private equity and hedge funds. She was the head of environmental and social risk at Morgan Stanley, a lawyer at Paul Weiss, and senior ESG advisor to Apollo Global Management. She was NYU Law's first social enterprise fellow, studying legal issues faced by social enterprises. And she is an NYU and University of Arizona alum. And most importantly, she's part of the inaugural class of this very program. And she can talk a little bit about that with all of you. Sujohn Sarkar is the managing director, asset management at Trinity Church, Wall Street, where he helps oversee 7 million square feet of commercial and residential property. His responsibilities include leasing, development, capital projects, asset management, and acquisitions. He was a director at Rubin Companies and a director at Cushman & Wakefield, New York investment sales team, and a vice president at Broadway Partners, an investment banker at Deutsche Bank, and he's a Princeton alum. I'll now hand it off to each of the panelists to introduce themselves and to share where they plan to travel after COVID ends. So maybe we'll kick off with Keren.
Hi, Bhakti and Columbia. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I'll start with the fun question. Where do I want to travel after COVID? You know, my ambitions are really grand. I want to be able to travel to my relatives' houses in the great state of New Jersey so that my son can finally spend a holiday with everyone there, which we haven't been able to do for a year. As Bhakti mentioned, I'm the Senior Responsible Investment Specialist at APG. I cover private equity, hedge funds, and alternative credits. And in that role, I sign off on investments in our asset managers. I also engage in dialogue with our asset managers about the integration of ESG and build out our strategy for those asset classes. A note about APG, we are one of the largest pension funds in the Netherlands. We manage nearly $500 billion in assets for more than 4.5 million pensioners. We represent 1 in 5 families in the Netherlands. And a really important aspect of how we think about our role is we need to generate pensions for a long time for our pensioners. But we also see sustainability as part of a fiduciary duty because we seek to generate returns while we also want to help create a livable world for them to enjoy their pensions. And that philosophy really guides a lot of what we do and what my responsible investment team do at APG.
Thanks, Karen. Sujohn?
Morning, everyone. Sujohn Sarkar. I work with Trinity Church Wall Street and with Bhakti, who actually I think we haven't met face to face because Bhakti joined the organization during COVID. So it's certainly a hopefully not a new normal. I know people throw that word around a lot. It's not really normal to not be able to convene and collaborate in person. We're certainly about in-person collaboration at Trinity and have been for a long time. So hopefully we get back to that soon. Where I want to travel, well, my wife and I got married just over a year ago, right at the sort of the outset of this. So we never did our honeymoon. So there's probably a short list of places that we want to go, but certainly eager to travel once we're both vaccinated, which should be soon. And as far as, just working at Trinity Church, it is a religious institution. It's a Episcopal parish located in Lower Manhattan. And, I think what's interesting about working, at the church in a real estate ownership capacity is the ability to affect change through ownership and through investment decisions and, our day-to-day activities. And I know for many of you, affecting change, it starts with, within your local communities, within, starting in high school, college, and beyond. That's certainly been, true for me personally, particularly in the areas of sustainability and social justice. And on Trinity Church, I just have a short, it's better to describe the church sometimes in visuals. So what is Trinity? It's a 325-year-old religious institution. Founded in 1697 at the current site of Broadway and Wall Street. The right image is the current church building from 1846. It's the third church. The first two were destroyed. With the longevity of Trinity, the history is inextricably linked to New York City. Columbia's predecessor, King's College, was founded on Trinity Church grounds. It's an active Episcopal parish. With services every week through its the two sanctuaries that you saw there, the church and St. Paul's Chapel. And the organization is led by our clergy. Our current priest in charge is Reverend Phil Jackson. We have a staff of 250 working in various capacities from music programming to grants making, pastoral care, homeless services, community learning, investment management, and real estate, to name a few. So certainly spans a lot of disciplines. We're guided by Trinity's core values, which are faith, integrity, inclusiveness, compassion, social justice, and stewardship. And those play a very important role in our investment decisions and our daily work. Actually, our partner and a large part of our portfolio is a long-term pension fund, Norges Investment Management. And so the values alignment is certainly an important part of that, about that partnership. Our strategic values include ending mass incarceration, providing homeless services, developing clergy leaders, and operating Trinity Commons, which is a 5-story community center that was just built and has not been, unfortunately, made open to the public yet. It was May of 2020 was supposed to be the grand opening. But it's poised to be the cornerstone of our community engagement and a launching pad for community leadership. So there's all kinds of things: a full-length basketball court, test kitchens, art studios, and seminar rooms. In 1705, Trinity was gifted a large swath of land in Lower Manhattan by the Queen of England, and much of that was sold off over the years, but Trinity continues to own a sizable portfolio that makes us a fairly sizable private owner in New York. And having this sort of long perspective gives us some patience to withstand market cycles. So one example of that, which we'll talk about later in terms of sustainability, is we made a decision last summer to proceed with an office development ground up, which is currently in foundation. At 561 Greenwich Street at King Street in Hudson Square. And so in that, we're incorporating an innovative building mechanical system, which was a concerted decision with a four-pronged approach to carbon emissions reduction. So, gets back to sort of the ability to, impact our environment through our day-to-day decisions. And that's our 325 years in 3 minutes. So we'll give it back to Bhakti.
Great, thank you for that overview and history. I'd actually forgotten that the first couple of Columbia graduations were in Trinity Church. So this really brings everything full circle. Maybe we'll start with Sujohn, because we started with Keren before, but maybe we can discuss, what role do you see asset owners playing in driving sustainability and inclusion across the investment value chain?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a direct role, because we have the ability to, on the sustainability side, certainly experiment and implement, and that's what we're doing at 561 Greenwich Street. We are doing it within our return parameters. As Keren mentioned, we have, fiduciary requirements and return requirements. Trinity's operating income is largely derived from the real estate, and our partner Norgis, of course, their pensioners are relying on the returns. So, that it's important for us to maintain, that rate of return, but we have to get creative in how to incorporate sustainable technology and green technology, into our building. So right now we're doing it in a ground up fashion. And we're hoping that the technology that we're using, this sort of multi-pronged approach, which I can get into later, informs how we retrofit the vast majority of our portfolio, which was built in the 1930s, which are these large old printing houses. So in direct ownership, I think gives us the ability to implement and experiment. Certainly the approach we're using is very unique in New York City. And then as far as inclusiveness and social justice, I think, how we're approaching it is, how do we then take, this technology, take this knowledge and empower the younger generation in New York City.
Great. Keren?
Yeah, so, from my perspective, as asset owners, we have large pools of capital that we need to direct, and our ability to direct them in ways that are consistent with our return requirements, as well as our sustainability goals, is important. And that's what we seek to do. And that's where our ability to influence sustainability and the value creation comes. So with respect to direct investments in companies, you can source opportunities that align with both objectives. In my case, I review our investments in external managers or in asset managers. And there we seek to direct capital to partners who will also seek to implement our objectives on sustainability and meet our risk return requirements. And so I think, that's where the importance of the dialogue comes in. We are, with respect to external asset managers, we are their clients. And so they're looking to make sure that they are stewards of our capital in the way that we envision. And there's power dynamics at play. So, influence depends on the size of money that you're investing in an asset manager, which is an important consideration. But still, at the end of the day, especially as more and more interest grows, we can influence the terms of the investment, and our engagement can help external managers understand what results that they need to achieve in sustainability. For us, we've been doing this a long time, so we seek to partner with our external managers, particularly those who are early in their journey, to help them build their programs on ESG and sustainability. So as an example of that, when 8 years ago, when we first started asking managers to report to us on ESG outcomes of their investments, very few were willing to do it because it was a new concept to them. Today, almost every manager is agreeing to report to us on ESG, and now we're seeking to push for more transparency on quantitative aspects of sustainability.
Great. We're extremely lucky to have our third panelist join us now. Andrew Siwo is the Director of Sustainable Investments and Climate Solutions at the New York State Common Retirement Fund, where he's the portfolio manager for the fund's $20 billion commitment to sustainable investment. Andy was investment director of investments at Crucial Partners, an investment consultancy to foundations and endowments, manager of the Global Impact Investing Network, and investment banker at JP Morgan. He teaches an ESG course at NYU and is a Cornell and Morehouse alum. I'll let Andy introduce himself for a couple minutes, including sharing with everyone where he plans to travel after COVID.
Thank you for that, and apologize for the slight delay. So first, thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to join this very august panel of practitioners. And I joined the sustainable investing wave, several years ago. I was working at JP Morgan, and I was working in a group called the Special Opportunities Group. And we actually were the book runners to a team called the Social Finance Team. And I was very captivated by their making investments that had this dual objective of both achieving some type of financial goal, as well as some measurable social or environmental benefit. And so I got extremely lucky, and I got a chance to go to an organization called the Global Impact Investing Network. And there I helped build a platform called Impact Base that connected GPs and LPs. So at the time, there was this fragmented market where you had those who had capital, oftentimes referred to as asset owners, and then you had those who needed capital, referred to as asset managers, and they just couldn't find each other. And so this tech platform allowed, think about it as almost like a Craigslist, where Craigslist doesn't necessarily own furniture, but I think many of us probably have either bought or sold furniture on Craigslist at some point in our lives. And fast forward to a time where I got a chance to become an investment consultant to leading endowments and foundations and helping build impact investment portfolios. And then currently, I oversee the Sustainable Investments and Climate Solutions portfolio for the state's pension plan. And my day-to-day consists of picking money managers. And we have a portfolio that represents a tapestry of investments that are tied to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And these are listed on our website if you want to take a look.
Great. And Andy, where do you plan to travel after COVID is done?
Where do I plan to travel? Well, actually, I confess that I'm guilty of traveling during COVID. And I think where I want to go afterwards is probably somewhere in East Africa, or the Maldives would be actually pretty nice. But those destinations are on my list.
Awesome. I have the more modest destination of San Francisco on my list with my daughter. We'll ask you the first question now, which is, what role do you see asset owners playing in driving sustainability and inclusion across the investment value chain?
Yeah, well, certainly asset owners are going to play a major role in that. As you could tell, even now, I'll use an example of we're in an era where companies are having to rethink what a good business looks like. And that, I think, is going to be driving some changes. Secondly, because asset owners play a role in deploying capital, the types of opportunities we tend to see oftentimes are dictated by what we like. And so, managers often call asset owners to get an idea of, hey, what are your solutions? What are you thinking about? And oftentimes that's a tough question, because asset owners, we can be a fickle bunch. And so by stating some very specific things that we were looking for, the process to achieving a positive outcome is quite complex. And so the final item I will say is it's important to really align interests. And being that asset managers obviously have a goal of attracting capital, investors typically have a goal of producing the investment outcomes, making sure that those two objectives are in line with each other, at least reducing cases where they can diverge greatly is something very important for asset owners to do.
Great. So now we're going to move on to a SWOT analysis. So what strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats do you find in driving sustainability and inclusion as a faith-based investor, Sujohn?
Certainly. So the strengths, as I mentioned earlier, our core values at Trinity are, which were established over a couple of decades pre-pandemic, align pretty well with sustainability and inclusion. So inclusiveness, social justice, and stewardship are sort of in our daily, thinking, and we refer to these things as sort of being mission-minded in everything we do. So we can't simply, decouple the folks that are working directly on the mission, which are our clergy and our grants-making department, from the investment management. So we, these core values manifest themselves in our asset decisions, as well as play a role as, as we're a connector institution to community organizations, the public sector, and private companies, which are either our investors or sometimes our tenants. So that's sort of on the strength side. On the weaknesses, I would say it's competing financial resources within the organization. As I mentioned earlier, the sort of the fiduciary responsibility we have with our JV partners. Fortunately, we have tremendous value alignment with our primary partners in the real estate portfolio, which is Norges Investment Management and Hines. Opportunities sort of, abound. I think it's we're in, sort of commercial application of clean technology. We're in very early innings. So from anything from policy making to education and outreach to form the next generation of green entrepreneurs in a diverse manner, we're certainly in the early stages and have a long way to go. We spend a lot of time thinking about how we can sort of empower the next generation. And threats, I think, from my perspective at the moment, I'd say it's over-regulation. So one of the hardest aspects of our system is sort of striking the balance between the free market and equity. Whether it's is it pure taxation, or is there a true public-private partnership? So there's a current ongoing debate on state policy on carbon emissions reduction versus the city policy, which would direct funds to a general account from non-compliant buildings. So it's a choice between sort of penalties versus investment in renewable energy in upstate New York to help downstate, which is, so downstate New York is more of a consumer, whereas upstate, there's more opportunity for clean energy origination.
Great. Keren, what about you? What strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunities do you find driving sustainability and inclusion as a Dutch public pension?
Yeah, it's interesting. Similar to Sujohn and Trinity, I think our strength is our alignment of interest with our pensioners. Their values are also ones that are aligned with the sustainability agenda, because they want their pensions, as I said earlier, in a livable world. And that really creates a lot of drive for us to do more on sustainability. And it's been why we've been so active on this for a long time. And what allows us to push the agenda. I think the fact that we see sustainability as part of our fiduciary duty is a huge strength, because we don't see financial objectives conflicting with our sustainability objectives. We see them both as part of our mission. I think the weakness that I see is data availability in the market, missing and incomplete data that really allows us to assess whether we're on the right path for sustainability, whether our investments are making a difference on sustainability. And in that also lies the opportunity for companies and asset managers to better define and make available such data. I know there's real challenges, methodologies differ, availability of data differs right now, but from my vantage point in private markets, particularly with private equity, there's huge opportunities there and opportunities to standardize data as well. And I think we're going to start to see more and more on that, building on what's already been happening in the market. In terms of threats, I see a huge threat of greenwashing and impact washing as the market grows, as we see more players enter the space because of interest from consumers, from asset owners. There's a risk of investments being held out as green or as impact oriented that are not. Without data, without metrics, without rigor to weed out the good from the bad, I fear that will damage the credibility of the industry. And so it's a threat we need to be mindful of and address. Great.
Andy, I'll turn now to you to answer the same question, the same SWOT analysis from the U.S. public pension perspective.
Yeah, sure. So I do add to Keren's thoughts about weaknesses on potentially being greenwashing and impact washing. Certainly, there is not a impact police. There's no ESG police. There's no SRI police. And as a result of that, these wonderfully amorphous space invites that, and it's something that asset owners should be looking out for. There are certainly a lot of opportunity in terms of some of the secular trends that we see persistent. Unfortunately, there's not a vaccine for racism and inequality. There's not a vaccine for climate change. And then there's not a vaccine for population growth. These are areas that can be defined as risks, and also an area that we can see that there will be obviously some opportunities as well, just based on some of the announcements that we've seen on the corporate side, that, pledges and just the changing of businesses and a different take of how diversity looks like. Today at 10 o'clock, our sole trustee for the fund, the comptroller for the state of New York, will be testifying before Congress on this exact topic of diversity and inclusion. And so I invite those who are free at 10 a.m. To log into the House Representatives Financial Inclusion, House Committee on Financial Inclusion, if I have the committee right, to see how that testimony will look. And there is another peer of ours in this space that will be providing testimony as well. So I say that to say that there's obviously a different level of attention that we're seeing. And in terms of strengths, the inflows in 2020 from ESG themed funds and then sustainable investments more broadly were massive. And I think that many people were curious to see how these funds will perform. After 10 years of an uninterrupted bull market, one could argue that some of these funds really have not been tested. And so to see how some of the funds performed certainly have provided relief to many people. And ultimately, it's just good investing. Some of the principles that we're discussing and are discussed in this style of investing are just good principles to investing. And so the expectation in 2021 is that many people are looking for a second act. And finally, I would say that a lot of this competition and excitement that we're seeing will ultimately, I think, benefit investors, because the cost for some of these investment strategies are going to be driven down because of the amount of competition that we're going to see. And I think that that will be a good thing.
Great. Maybe we can move on now to the asset classes themselves. What are some of the unique characteristics of the asset owner role in sustainability and inclusion, and private equity and hedge funds, Keren?
Yeah, so I'll take each one in turn. So, the unique aspect of the private equity is that they're external managers who take controlling stakes in companies. So they have a lot of opportunity to influence the agenda, the sustainability agenda of companies. They also appoint a majority of the board. So when it comes to inclusion, that's a huge lever that they have to increase representation at portfolio company at very senior levels. Now, we as an asset owner invest in these managers, and because of our AUM, we invest significant AUM in these asset managers, which gives us a seat at the table. And so what we want to see, and what's important to us, is that asset managers are building out processes to integrate these sustainability considerations, whether it be diversity or climate change, into how they manage and engage in active ownership with their companies. We like to see them assign responsibility on these issues to the board. And we want to see them have companies report to them, which gets to the data point, because they have the ability to influence companies to collect and report out that data to the private equity manager and to ourselves. So that's a little bit on private equity and the role of the asset owner in that space to influence sustainability and inclusion. Hedge funds is unique, and actually hedge funds is a really big topic, to a really one single name to embrace a lot of different strategies. And so I think at this point, the hedge funds are still moving along on the trajectory of integrating ESG considerations into their processes. And as an asset owner, it's our role to influence that conversation and ensure that hedge funds are thinking about the role of ESG in investment decision making and in their strategy.
Great. Andy, maybe you can share the unique characteristics from a public equity perspective. And you're on mute.
That was the most popular phrase last year, and also this year. Because I wanted to provide the exact and correct name of the 10 a.m. discussion. So it's the U.S. House Committee on Financial Services, and the 10 a.m. hearing topic is how diversity data can measure commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the U.S. House Committee on Financial Services, if you want to tune into that. And so from an asset class, I won't go through all of the asset classes, but there definitely is a difference. The portfolio that I oversee contains investments across all asset classes, and that's the exciting thing. We see opportunities across all asset classes, and the benchmarking of opportunities to the standard benchmarks, I think it illuminates how competitive they can be. And last year, we were able to find 2 fixed income managers that are benchmarked to the Bloomberg's Barclays aggregate benchmark, and handily outperformed that benchmark last year. Very excited about that. And on the real estate side, we were fortunate to find a Nordic-based real estate manager that was very environmentally responsible in terms of how they source the materials and construct the real estate. And on the public equity side, some of the opportunities that look exciting are the climate index funds, in an area that we're spending time. And obviously, as a large public pension, a lot of our capital is indexed. Opportunistic, there are investments that may not necessarily fit in private equity, may not necessarily fit in credit, and they're a little more nuanced. We found some opportunities there as well. And then in infrastructure, and this would be in real assets, we're seeing a lot of opportunities in infrastructure and renewable energy. And so I would say that it's been exciting to see that there's just not one asset class where we're seeing opportunities. It's spread out pretty broadly.
Great. Sujohn, from a real estate perspective, what are some of the unique characteristics?
Sure. As Andy mentioned earlier, sort of this the awareness piece of it is interesting, and increased awareness. I think there's certainly a feeling that environmental justice and social justice are very intertwined. So you have things like the urban heat index, for example. I think a lot of the technology that we're seeing, and interestingly enough, some of it comes from the Nordic countries. That it's very similar sort of goals, and I think across different asset classes within real estate, whether it's commercial, residential, or other asset classes, I think the goal is not only emissions reduction, but also improving the built environment. So I think, as an example, the building that we're building right now, as I mentioned at the outset, 561 Greenwich Street, we've chosen to be a market leader, partly because of our long horizon, but also with our value alignment with Nordis. So Norway is striving for carbon neutrality by 2050. So the strategies we're using in that development, it's four-pronged, and it's ground up. Actually, starts 120 feet below ground with geothermal energy, with a radiant slab system, with air-sourced heat pumps, and a dedicated outdoor air system. So those are a combination of four things that it's pretty rare in New York City, but elements of that strategy have very widespread application. And the ultimate goal is an improved built environment, but the twin goals within that is decoupling ventilation from heating and cooling through a localized water source system, and then a higher volume of outdoor air. So it's something obviously we're very focused on during the pandemic, but those two things basically create an electrified building with a lot less reliance, almost no reliance on natural gas. And so there's the emissions component, and then there's the thermal comfort component of it. What's interesting about that type of system is that it's very applicable in a residential setting as well. So a few weeks ago, I was on the phone with the chairman of NYCHA, and they have a very similar sort of outlook on how to decentralize a lot of these central plants that were built in the 60s and 70s, and even before that in the 50s in a lot of cases. So I think we share this sort of common goal. There's clearly a shared awareness of things like, the urban heat index. It's just purely, the temperature and the climate in large parts of New York City, needs to be improved. So I think ultimately, where we'd like to, as a religious institution and a community organization, would like to see it is local, New Yorkers and the younger generation be empowered with both the implementation and the ownership eventually of that technology.
Great. So maybe I'll ask one personal question to each of you, and then we'll open up to audience questions. What are some of the most important lessons that you learned on your career path? We'll start with Andy.
That's a great question. I'm very fortunate to have a private sector view of the sustainable investing space, having seen it in a nonprofit for-profit, and now having a government lens. And I would say there are three things in terms of what I've found to be very important in my journey. And the first is to have a curiosity, and I think that curiosity is important because it's just becoming very competitive. Financial services is competitive, and what I mean by curiosity is what are you actually reading on a daily basis? I know Bhakti, you obviously as a Forbes contributor, I like all of the items that you are writing, and when I oftentimes talk to students and I ask, what are some of the articles that they're reading, that gives me an idea of how curious they are about this space. That would be the first item. The second, I would say, is to try to be as to have a very macro, I would say, view about where opportunities are going to be. I think when students or even professionals or limit themselves to something very specific, you can perhaps overlook some opportunities. And so having a very broad perspective is useful. And the third item that I think is important is being able to leverage your network. And so here we obviously are part of a Columbia network, and if there are practitioners that are already in your space, having a conversation with them is very, very important, because a lot of times where students are looking at career opportunities, the job description may not be exactly what that job could entail. And so being able to contact professionals and have a conversation could save you a lot of time. So those are the three items that come to mind.
Great. Keren?
Yeah, my feedback is going to be very similar to Andy's. One, the importance of the informational interview. Definitely leverage your networks and your contacts to meet with people who or in organizations you admire, who have roles that you would love to have someday, and talk to them about their career path, what they see as the future for the industry, and what would be the right skill sets for people who are going to be competitive for those roles. And also just connect with them personally, because that personal connection really matters someday when you're looking for a job opportunity, or when you in that organization, or when that person has a contact at an organization that you want to get into. So really, yeah, recommend connecting personally. And then also, when you move into your next job, make the most of it. The job description might not be exactly what you want, but there's always opportunities to be curious, to do more, to explore the organization and the role more, and to think about how your role connects to a bigger vision on sustainability. And I know that's really abstract. And if you want to contact me, I'm happy to talk in more details. But when I started in this space, I was actually in law school, and nobody knew what I was talking about when I was speaking about the intersection of business and social impact. So every job that I went into, I had to find the opportunities to connect the job at hand with my vision of what could be. And I think that really set me up to succeed in this space.
Great. Sujohn, what lessons have you learned in your career?
Well, I mean, a lot of the same themes from Keren and Andy. First of all, a career is a long, trajectory, a long proposition. So, your real estate's very multidisciplinary. So you're not going to figure the entire industry out in one fell swoop. It takes quite a bit of time. So for me, I would say the lesson is filling skills gaps along the way. So I'm, sort of 20 years in. So halfway through my career, I'd spent the majority of my time in sort of capital markets. So a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of software, working in banking and capital markets. So I didn't have sort of the bricks and mortar knowledge, and so and the ground up development experience. So I made a concerted effort to pivot to a role in leasing and operations, which, certainly less glamorous than capital markets, but one that was really focused on redevelopment and ground up development. So I spent a lot of time in mechanical rooms, machine rooms, rooftops, basements, sifting through, BMS screens with building engineers, performing brownfield cleanups. So I think that was, that really supplemented, my prior experience in capital markets. So, I still sort of arrive at things with a fundamental financial framework that, I learned early in my career, but I think it's, in order to really be, sort of a holistic decision maker in the industry. And then as we've been talking about on this panel, impacting change, incorporating, new ideas, taking incremental risk in our decisions in order to, to affect change, really requires sort of, filling those skills gaps along the way.
We don't have any audience questions, so I'll ask another question.
I think there actually are two in the chat, actually.
There are two in the chat. Okay. Great. So I'll ask both the questions because we only have 10 minutes, and maybe you can address either one or both as you answer. What insight or advice do you have for ESG integration in emerging markets, more specifically in frontier clean tech? How can companies and startups based in less developed countries get investments to bring frontier technology to underserved communities at your respective companies? And what is a typical day like for an ESG advisor in PE? Those are probably questions primarily for Keren, but maybe also for Andy.
Sure, I'll jump in, on a typical day in 1 minute or less. So ESG is a tool that is used to improve investment returns. Environmental social governance oftentimes needs to be decoupled. We say the word ESG to try to find a composite for one item, but obviously we all agree that the ESG, environmental social governance, for a tech company and a manufacturer are going to be quite different. And we can have another discussion on just that topic. And so what does an ESG advisor do as it relates to private equity is every investment faces environmental, social, and governance issues and opportunities. So whether you're in venture, growth, buyout, secondaries, all of these types of investments are facing some type of environmental, social, and governance issues and opportunities. And so what an advisor would do is assess these types of opportunities and highlight those issues. And there's an expectation from that manager that you're evaluating that they can opine on how they look at ESG factors. Oftentimes that could be from ESG policy. Oftentimes that could be an ESG team or examples of how that influenced a decision. So I'll stop there, but hopefully that provides some sort of flavor on the response to that question.
Maybe we're getting toward the end of the panel, so maybe I'll ask one last question. Because there are no more questions, but there is another question from the audience. Let's see. In the PE space, are you seeing a true understanding of LPs of ESG and how it affects the performance of GPs? And nice to see you as in this event, Alex.
I can jump in. So I think the word I keep hearing now is convergence. And I think we are starting to see some convergence on how to define ESG in a more standard way, and how that is linked to the financial performance of companies. So, a great example is Carlyle recently produced a really interesting report where it assessed a number of years of data on employee voluntary turnover, on job creation, and on diversity. And they were able to show how positive impacts on those three categories also positively impacted the bottom line.
Great. Now we have no questions now. And now that we're getting toward the end of the panel, I'll ask one final question, which each of the speakers can combine with their closing statements. As a way to kind of move the needle in your work, what's the biggest opportunity or thorniest issue in sustainability and inclusion for your asset owner type and asset class focus? If you can kind of combine that with a parting statement, that would be super. We'll start with Andy.
Yeah, there are lots of what I would describe as thorny issues. But the one that comes to mind for me is, our obligation is delivering returns and protecting the portfolio, delivering returns to the beneficiaries and members, over 1 million members and beneficiaries of the state's public pension plan. And we are squarely focused on that. And so some of the items that we are discussing, present risks. And our role is just being aware of those risks and finding investments that reduce those risks and take advantage of opportunities. And of course, key to our approach is decarbonizing our portfolio. There are physical and transition and disclosure risks that are very prominent and well known at this point. And so I would say that the thorny issue is, how do we continue to deliver the best returns to the beneficiaries who we've promised? And so that is, I would say, the thorniest issue. And then parting would be, as Keren mentioned, her availability for questions. I'm also available to any students who have questions. I love to be helpful in any way, and I appreciate the invitation.
Thanks, Andy. Keren?
Yeah, so I think one of the thorniest issues, which I mentioned earlier, is data and demonstration of outcomes on ESG and their ties to financial impact. And I guess my final comment is that I see, those who are entering the workforce as the ones who are going to help us solve this problem. And students like you who are getting up at 8 in the morning to attend a panel like this, who are digitally and data savvy, we're going to be able to solve this. So I applaud you all for being on this panel and look forward to seeing you enter the workforce and what you can accomplish in this space.
I'm also hopeful about the students who slept in and who will listen to the replay. So let's not knock them either.
You too, who take an hour out of their time to listen to a recording.
Sujohn?
Similar to what Andy said, one of the authority issues is the cost of implementation and retrofitting our older buildings. The opportunities, I think, we didn't really get a lot into the emerging markets, but on the theme of awareness, sort of where we source materials, where we're, the communities that we're impacting through our decisions, that's becoming more and more important. And to Keren's point, it's really the up to sort of the incoming, sort of generation to help us solve some of those issues as well. And we continue to sort of peel back, the onion.
Great. Well, thank you very much to our panelists for joining us this morning. And thank you very much to the audience and those listening to the replay. And thank you to Columbia for bringing us all together.